Hello and welcome to today's Insights Alliance webinar. I'm Katie Rains from Indigo and I'm delighted that you're all able to join us today. It was wonderful to hear the collective shoulder drop and sigh of relief of everyone working in our sector at about 3:45 yesterday afternoon. And now at least we can start planning again for what we all hope is now going to be the permanent return of live events. Before we get going, a few instructions on practical things. On the YouTube site, you'll see a live chat panel where you can submit questions or comments at any time. So please do keep those coming in throughout the webinar and don't wait till the end. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by some of my Insights Alliance partners in crime. Chris Unit from One Further, who's much more knowledgeable than I am about all things digital, and he's going to talk us through what we found out so far about how audiences are and aren't engaging with digital cultural content. And by David Rees from Baker Richards, who's going to give his expert analysis and reflections on what we've learned about the pricing of digital content. At the end of the presentations, I'm going to hand over to Robin Cantrell-Fennick from Baker Richards, who will handle the Q&A for us. But before that, I just want to give you a more general update on the work that we've been doing and how it all fits together, and to encourage you to join if you haven't yet been involved. As you probably know, Indigo started the research back in April last year with After the Interval, and we've continued to research audience sentiment into returning to live events and cultural activity ever since. By working in collaboration with One Further and Baker Richards since September, we've been able to expand the breadth of our research and also ensure that we have tools for cultural organisations to use whatever stage of reopening they've been at. The key point for us all now is to think about how audiences are feeling and to factor that into our planning as we reopen. So if you're not currently checking in with your audience, perhaps now might be the time to join us. We have three main tools that cultural organisations have been using, and all are still available to use if you'd like to. The Audience and Visitor Tracker, which is the longitudinal survey that people are sending out each month to check in regularly with audiences. And most of the organisations that have been sending that out are ones that haven't reopened or have had to close again. Then there's the Digital Experience Survey, which is specifically designed to look at digital experiences. And then there's the pre and post visit experience survey, which is for organisations who are reopening or who have opened to capture audience sentiment before people visit and then again afterwards. And we'll show you some of the results from each of these surveys in today's webinar. We're also delighted that we've just launched the interactive dashboard for the audience tracker element of the toolkit. And this allows you to see the very latest data that we have at any point and to filter it by things like age and region and type of organisation. It will be very important to keep an eye on this, I think, over the coming weeks, as things, I imagine, will start changing quite quickly now. In today's session, I'll firstly be talking through the key changes in the audience tracker that we've spotted for results up until the end of January. Then Chris will pick up on the digital findings from both the tracker and the digital experience survey. And David will talk about pricing for digital using the findings from both those surveys as well. So the overview of the tracker data, this includes data from October to January. We've had over 20,000 responses, 5,000 in January, and we have 50 participating organisations in this data set. That's just an idea of the profile of the audience. Predominantly, it's a regional audience at the moment, and a considerable amount are classed as vulnerable. So there's an older age profile. Audience confidence levels. So it's fair to say that to the end of January, confidence in returning to cultural experiences has hit the lowest point that we've seen so far. And I think the challenge at the moment is that we've got an audience base that is feeling very unconfident about returning, but then obviously the news from yesterday, which is fabulous, that we can reopen. So somehow we have to square these two things, and we're going to have to take audiences with us on that journey. The safety measures for in-person cultural experiences. you can see from this graph that the top two bars there, no face coverings, seating operated as normal, subject to COVID testing on arrival. The big pink bars are the number of people who say they'd be uncomfortable about that. So at the moment, audience sentiment would suggest that people either being tested or vaccinated and just coming in with no social distancing is not at all something that they would accept. So either there's got to be a big shift in customer opinion between now and June, if that's possible in June, or we have to think about whether we will, even if it's legal to do so, whether we need to put some restrictions in place, even if we don't actually have to. Mask wearing is more important than it was in October and November, as is socially distanced seating. So all of these things are somewhat contrary to venues reopening with no restrictions at all in June. So we just need to bear that in mind. Future bookings. There's still uncertainty about future bookings. So you'll see in January, I mean, we've got a higher number of people that are putting it off longer to book. More than 6 months is 20%. That's the highest that we've seen since October, with a further 32% saying that they're not sure when. So over half the respondents either not sure, not planning to book at all, or not looking to book for 6 months. We do expect this to shift, but at the moment, that's what it looks like. And I'm going to be really interested to see how this does shift, and I hope and expect that it will. Then the waiting for a vaccine. So we've seen the number of people, the proportion of people that are saying they prefer to wait. That's the bottom purple bit. They prefer to wait until, hang on, wait a minute, I'm not looking at this right, we're missing one. Yeah, the bottom one is the vaccine. The purple, the dark purple is the vaccine. So 35% of people saying they would wait until there's a vaccine or they've been vaccinated, and an increase in the number of people saying that they would like to wait. The next purple one up is they'd like to wait until they can attend in the usual way again, however long that might take. And again, that's somewhat at odds with just flinging the doors open. So we just need to bear that one in mind. Okay. And then obviously that does go with age. So you can see that the 65 to 74-year-olds are the most likely to wait until they've been vaccinated. Perhaps the 75 plussers, less so now because they have been vaccinated, but then a huge growth in the number of those who say they would prefer to wait and attend in the usual way. So it'll be really interesting to see if those people are prepared to come out with social distancing, whether they'll just stay away until they can come back as normal, even if that means waiting longer. But it definitely changes with age. And I just want to finish off with these before I pass over to Chris. These two slides here are from our experience survey, which venues were using when they were reopening. And they show that the act of reattending massively increases the confidence of audiences. So with the first graph, we asked people how they were feeling about their forthcoming visit before they attended. And the confidence score on a scale of -100 to 100 is around 40%. But then we asked them exactly the same question immediately after their visit, and that had increased to 80%. So the actual act of attending had increased their confidence because their anxiety about the forthcoming visit had disappeared and they felt really confident. Coupled with that, on the next slide, to what extent has this visit made you more or less likely to come to cultural events, to other more cultural events, venues and activities? And again, that's very high. So those organisations who have reopened safely, built confidence with venues, with audiences, are doing a great job for the rest of us in terms of helping that confidence to build. So I'm now going to hand over to Chris, who's going to talk about digital. And even though we're planning to return live soon, it's clear that the shift to digital has been really significant. And so it's really important that we understand what the opportunities and challenges are for that. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Katie. Wonderful. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk through some of the findings from the report that came out in January. I'm also going to show some of the findings that have come from the digital experience survey that people have been sending to people after they've engaged with some sort of digital activity. And then we've got a couple of special guests that we're going to bring in as well. So firstly, just to walk you through some of the findings that we've had. In terms of the uptake with digital activities, we've had 55% of respondents who have engaged with culture online in the past, well, it's nearly a year now, isn't it? So in the past 10 or 11 months. So that is quite a good chunk of the respondents. There's still quite a few that haven't engaged yet. And there's some messaging coming up that might be interesting and relevant for those who are maybe slightly more reticent. Looking at those who have engaged with venues digitally, many of them have engaged more than once. We've got a significant proportion who've engaged at least 4 times, and actually kind of a minority of around sort of the 9 to 13% who have only engaged once. So there's some frequency building up with which people are engaging with online cultural content. The bit everyone's interested in at the moment, certainly from the kinds of inquiries that pass my desk, is how likely is engagement with digital activities and experiences going to continue into the future. We've not seen the answers to this differ much from month to month. So there's a good proportion of around about 40% who are saying that they are interested or very interested in engaging with culture online in the future, and another roughly a third who are kind of up for grabs. That has increased slightly in going into January. We've been speculating as to whether that might be as a result of people deciding that they were going to wait until a vaccine had come through before they were willing to come back into venues, and whether it was the flip side of that coin. And if we break that down by age, to me, the demographics of how this breaks down is very interesting to me. There isn't a huge amount of variation. So anyone who thinks that doing digital activity is automatically a route to engaging with younger audiences, it's not necessarily true as well. What we're finding is that digital activity and experiences are good for breaking down all sorts of barriers in terms of access, geography, and so on. And those kinds of barriers, I mean, they apply to all of us at the moment, but they apply just as strongly to more elderly patrons as they might do to younger ones. So it's interesting to see how this breaks down. The slight increase in under 35s might speak to a slightly more tech savviness, but it's really not a massive difference. I'm going to leave David from Baker Richards to talk more specifically about pricing and propensity to pay for different types of experiences. But I just wanted to bring this through again because it's relevant to our first special guest who's coming up in a second. And that was the responses to how likely people would be to buy to pay for digital experiences in different ways. So 60% of respondents said that they would be interested in buying a ticket for an online event from the organisation that sent them the survey. So that's encouraging. With another third who are kind of indifferent, and perhaps if it was the right offer, then that would be enough to shift them off the fence. And that matched what they were their attitude to others. So the thing that comes up here is that there is likely to be some movement between organisations, a slight stronger inclination to the organisation who has their contact details, but there's likely to be some promiscuity of people hopping from one venue to another, which you would probably expect. The monthly subscription for online events is interesting because that is how a lot of people have been have moved to consuming content through Netflix, Disney Plus, Amazon Prime, and so on. Since the last time we did one of these webinars, National Theatre at Home has come out, and so we're keeping a close eye on how that one does. English National Ballet also have their offers, and Rambert as well. These kinds of subscriptions are starting to become more common, and so while there is a large number of people who say they are not likely, almost 2/3 of people say they're not likely to do that, there are a third of people who could be more readily motivated to pay for some sort of subscription. I think the question is just how many of those subscriptions are they likely to fork out for. And I mean, this is one of the big questions at the moment, and it's this one of what people's attitudes are going to be towards attending to online culture once they're able to attend a suitable variety of live performances in person again. Now that we've got an inkling of a date in the not too distant future, this question's coming into focus with people a lot more. This graph I always think can be read in a couple of different ways. There are around 8 to 10% of people who are just not interested. As soon as they can stop staring at screens, it seems that they will do. At the other end of the scale, there are just under a quarter of people who are converts and say that or we're already engaging in this kind of thing. So they will continue, and this has been good for them. Personally, I count myself in that as father to a young child. I don't get out to go and see stuff quite so much as I'd like to, so this has all been a bit of a boon for me. There's a slice of people around the sort of 8 to 9% who have said that they will they'll carry on, but as long as it's free. And then there is this 61% to, well, 58 to 62% as it's differed over the months. It hasn't really wavered too greatly, who would still consider online events if they wouldn't have the chance to see them live. I always say I think that's a huge opportunity. The geographical, the barriers of geography and convenience, I think, are two incredibly large barriers, and the and digital delivery and remote delivery of cultural experiences can get over those. So you may choose to read that slightly less optimistically as I, but I think with the right offer, with the right distribution, there is a good chance to capture a larger number of people. And it's interesting seeing how this one splits by age as well. So it does seem that it's the under 55s who are more likely to engage with and pay for online events in the future. Now, I wanted to pull out some of the findings from the digital experience report. If you're an organisation that is doing digital or remote delivery of cultural experiences and activities, I'd highly recommend doing something like this. The feedback that's coming back from them is really interesting. One of the questions that it asks is, how easy or difficult did you find it to watch or take part in the online experience? And we found that 73% of people so far have found it fairly easy or very easy. Only 3% of people found it very difficult. Talking to some clients and some others, I know that one of the scary things about doing these kinds of things is the amount of customer support and, well, box office staff needing to retrain as IT support staff, essentially, to help people set up their iPads or their Chromecasts or whatever in the right way. I think there's some good, there's starting to be some good practice out there with people developing how-to guides to talk people through how to set up the devices and walk people through the process of getting set up quite nicely. But notwithstanding that, there's a good number of people who have who've reported that this is quite easy. If you're getting that kind of feedback through this kind of surveying, then being able to display that on your production pages or your event or exhibition pages, whatever it is you're delivering, being able to show that it's really easy to use might help people get over that uncertainty gap. The other thing that's come through really strongly is when we've asked people how the experience compared with how they thought it would be. And it's a massive 64% who've said that, not that they just met their expectations, about a quarter of people said that the experience matched their expectations. 64% of people have said that the experience was better or much better than what they were expecting. Like, if I was getting these kinds of numbers through, I'd be shouting them from the rooftops at the moment. Only 10% said that it was worse or much worse than expected. I'd love to know, and I haven't looked yet, but just how that matches up with the tech difficulties that people might have had. So I think that's something to some information to try and capture. And if you are doing programs of digital activity, then have these kind of stats to help make the case and make the sale to your audiences. This is something that there's all sorts of feedback. If you look for any of the bigger events that are going on and look at some of the feedback, there's some wonderful feedback that organisations are getting. One of my favourites, which illustrates what we were just talking about, was Bournemouth Symphony Orchestra. So at the beginning of December, they announced that they were going to be doing a second series of their live streamed symphonic concerts through the first part of this year. I think tickets are still available. There's still a few weeks left to go. And just seeing comments like this one from Dr. Trixie Gadd underneath that says, fantastic news, having originally signed up to the autumn series simply to support our local orchestra, not necessarily planning to watch all the concerts. I now look forward immensely to my weekly classical fix. I think this picks up on a few things. It's interesting that they are they're doing it's a subscription-based offer that they've got. We've got someone here who bought tickets to support the organisation more so than particularly wanting to watch the thing, and that it was better than they expected, and it's formed a habit as well. So I've been impressed by what Bournemouth Symphony Orchestra have been doing. So earlier this week, I caught up with Sophie Hart from Bournemouth Symphony Orchestra and asked some questions about what it is they've been doing and the audience reaction to that and how that's gone in terms of sales and their future plans. So we should have a little bit of video from that.
So we've actually done quite a lot of digital activity, but I guess the main event for us has been live streaming our weekly concerts from Poole Lighthouse. Yeah, we had to get a bit creative with our music making, and yeah, so we've hugely extended the stage at Poole Lighthouse, and we managed to get our orchestra in performing every week. And our digital team have been in a separate little studio filming us with remote head cameras and various other things, and we've been putting that out on our website every Wednesday evening. So that's been the main event, I guess, for us. But we've also from about June time last year, which was kind of the beginnings of the thought process for this, was we did a little magazine series on our Facebook page, where our chief executive, Dougie, he did some interviews with various conductors and musicians and things, and that was received really, really well. So that we knew that there was an appetite there for people to listen to the BSO. And then from September, we were able to live stream, which has been really successful so far.
And how have you been charging for those?
So we've had a couple of different models for charging. The main one being our subscription. So we had a 12 concert series between September and December last year, and another 12 concert series between January and March this year. And we sold those at £100 package. So for that, you get every Wednesday night concert, a pre-concert talk for that, and a PDF booklet full of program notes. So you're getting the full concert experience on one page on our website that you get to view every week. And that was a really positive thing for us, because a lot of our audience already buy a live subscription if we were going into the concert hall. So it meant that they could replicate their customer journey almost exactly, if not a bit easier, because they didn't have to fill out a form. And then they can just log on every week and just watch our concerts. But we've also made it available as individual concerts for £9.
What kind of results have you seen from that in terms of ticket sales and any numbers that you can share?
It's it's been really actually amazing. I did a quick had a quick look at the figures before this chat, and we have sold over 30,000 tickets between September and now, which is amazing. A lot of those are subscriptions. In fact, the majority of them, probably 2/3, are subscriptions. Which has been really, really good. I don't think we really expected that many, but it has been really, really positive. And
and what's the audience feedback been like?
So we've had really positive feedback from our audience. There was the initial hurdle of getting them online and things, but actually what we found that has been really, really positive is a lot of our audience are based in fairly remote villages in Devon and Dorset and places, and it's meant that they've been able to stay in contact with the BSO and experience the BSO at a time when we've just not been able to get to them. A lot of our feedback has been about how lovely it is that they can see the orchestra a lot more close up than they would have done otherwise. They get to know the musicians in a way that they've not been able to before. A few people have just enjoyed the fact that they can have a drink while they're watching and be a bit more casual about it, which has been really, really nice. And 82% of the people who filled out our most recent Culture Restart survey said that it was better or much better than they were expecting. And the same 82% thought it was a really moving experience being able to do that from their home. So it's been really, really lovely.
Any plans to continue this for the longer term once venues open and people are allowed back in? Have there been any discussions around that?
I think so. I think in the nearer future, I know that there are hopes that we can do a kind of more popular subscription. So the audience that we're hoping to reach a bit more are the ones who would attend our popular concerts in the park in the summer, or who had attended like our symphonic Pink Floyd that we did in 2019, those sorts of audiences. So I know over the summer I think there are hopes that we can do a couple of popular concerts every other week or so and do a subscription package in the same way that we have done over the last couple of few months, and offer that as an upbeat thing to enjoy during the summer when we may not be able to have those big crowds. There is potential for us to do a blended subscription. So our seasons in Exeter and Portsmouth and places like that are generally a lot smaller than the ones in Poole. So we're hoping potentially that there'll be the option to buy X number of concerts in Exeter and then get 5 of our live stream concerts that we're doing from Poole as like a supplement to that. So absolutely, I think is the short answer.
Have you seen much difference in the audiences that you're getting along to the live streamed ones? Is it mostly your existing audiences, or is it does it go beyond that?
It's been interesting actually. We've recently been doing a lot of just tracking new people to our database and new people buying tickets, and that has actually increased a lot more in recent months and weeks, because we're a lot more available. Obviously our core audience is still very much the same, which is really lovely, and I think that was the main purpose of us doing this. Is it was audience retention. We don't want to lose that very loyal audience that we have, but at the same time we've been able to reach people who supported the BSO X number of years ago and have since moved to New Zealand or France or Germany, and they've been able to watch as well. So yeah, it's been really interesting. We've got a few more people being able to dip their toe in the water, as it were, and just have a quick view.
So that was Sophie from Bournemouth Symphony Orchestra. That was there were so many rich little nuggets in there. It was really good. There were a few other questions in the surveying that we're doing. One of which was this one about what motivates people to take part. As you probably expect, there's a large proportion of people who see this as the next best thing to attending or visiting in person, 75%. The other huge thing that comes up almost as strongly is this desire to support the venue or the promoter behind that cultural experience. And these two things are head and shoulders above every other reason that people had for taking part in things. The strength with which people are wanting to support the organisation was really strong, and surprised me a little bit, if I'm honest. I think this came through the tweet about Bournemouth Symphony Orchestra, that being the original reason someone decided to buy the ticket for that symphonic series. We're wondering to what extent that's going to carry on, and how long a shelf life that has, and whether there is an opportunity at the moment to, I've put it in rather crass terms here, to capitalise on that desire to support organisations. You could describe it as giving people an outlet for expressing their support for the kinds of things that cultural institutions do, and the dire straits that many of them find themselves in at the moment. So I think that's again, that's something when you're thinking about your messaging around these kinds of digital experiences, is something to play up, and it's something that might inform some of the pricing strategy that will go into that as well. The other thing that I get asked an awful lot around these kinds of digital experiences is to what extent they're going to be taking away from physical audiences. And this is another question that's in the digital experience survey. It asks, what would be your attitude to visiting the cultural organisation in person as a result of watching or taking part in the online experience? 60% of people said would make no difference to them particularly. 34% have said that they would be more likely to visit, with fewer people saying they were, almost vanishingly small number saying that it would put them off visiting. So I think there are a couple of things to take away from this. I think firstly, there's no particular evidence from asking people that digital experiences would take away from live audiences. That might differ if you're doing some sort of hybrid experience. It might take people away from a particular performance or event, but it's not going to necessarily take those out of your audience necessarily. They might, the digital experience might be an addition to the in-person event. As I'm sure you've heard ad nauseum over the past year, there is nothing to replace the live visit or attendance at a cultural event. But I also think the extent to which people you might cannibalize your audience, it should be outweighed completely by the much greater distribution that a digital cultural experience should have. I would say if you are doing digital experiences, over time you're looking to diversify your audience away from just your core audience, if you're depending on what it is. But ideally, for the numbers to stack up as much as anything, you'd be wanting to enlarge your audience and reach people who would otherwise have barriers to engaging with you in some way, in ways that those within your catchment area don't particularly. There are a couple of things I just wanted to pick up on as well. So when we're looking at the types of experience that people are offering and the way that they're structuring their audience development and outreach and the distribution of what they've got, there are some interesting economics that come into play here. And there's just a very small number of case studies that I would point people to have a look at the different ways you can balance experiences. And David Rees is going to go on later and we'll put some of the survey findings behind some of these things. So we've got examples like the Royal Court back in November, December, who did a production called My White Best Friend. And one of the things that they did with that is that they made tickets available through the Black Ticket project. So half of the tickets were available for free through the Black Ticket project. One of the interesting things that happens when you've got digital distribution of anything really is that the marginal cost of especially a stream performance, the marginal cost of adding an extra person to that shrinks to close to zero. People aren't going to be you're not giving away tickets to seats that would not ordinarily be full. There are no concerns about the kinds of seats that you might be giving people. You don't want to be giving people terrible free tickets because they'll never come back again. But the better tickets in the auditorium are going to be the most high value. So with a lot of these things, with that playing field leveled, it means that it's easier to do ticket distributions as in very specific ways as an audience development tactic, and that is something that the Royal Court did. We're also seeing things like this. So Dream, which is a production from, well, it's everyone. It's the RSC, the Manchester International Festival, Marshmallow Laser Feast, and the Philharmonia. This is coming up in March. The interesting thing that they're doing is to be an audience member for this digital experience. It's free. If you want to join what they're calling Audience Plus, where you get to interact with the performance, then the ticket price is £10. This has been used by a few others as well. Comedy at the COVID Arms, if you've come across that, they had a gig on Saturday night. It's £2 for a ticket for a comedy show with some named comedians and musicians as part of that. But for if you pay a little bit extra, if you pay for, I think it's a £10 or £12 ticket, then you get the interactive experience. If you like, you can raise your hand and get called upon by the comedians and take part. You can enter the competitions to win booze and other things as well. So looking at the difference in the richness of experience between the interactive and the passive, and pricing those differently. And then I'm also very interested by what a few other organisations have done. So the Lawrence Batley Theatre, the Barn Theatre, New Wolseley, Oxford Playhouse and Theatre Clwyd are collaborating on Picture of Dorian Gray, which is the latest in a line of productions from Lawrence Batley Theatre. I think what they're doing really interestingly is they seem to have found some sort of model for delivering digital experiences to a growing audience, and they're working on their audience development through two key things really. One is cast names and having a good cast. So the upcoming production, this has Stephen Fry, Joanna Lumley, Russell Tovey, Fionn Whitehead and Emma MacDonald in it. Not terrible names to have. And they've got 5 organisations who are co-producing this piece of work and all promoting it themselves. That I don't quite know the detail behind that arrangement, but it I assume would de-risk the production process somewhat. But it also means that, or the other thing they've got is they've got 17 partner organizations around the country who are also incentivized to promote this to their audiences as well. I've been really impressed by the work that the Lawrence Batley Theatre have been doing over the past 12 months or so. And I was delighted when Henry Felu Bennett from the theatre agreed to have a chat with David Rees, who will be presenting the next part of this. So before we go to live David, we've got pre-recorded David in conversation with Henry Felu Bennett from the Lawrence Batley Theatre.
Thank you, Henry, for joining us. Wanted to ask you a few questions about the digital work that you've been doing. So first question is, well, basically, what types of digital activity have you been doing recently?
So I think what we've tried to do is we've tried to split it into two distinct camps. So there's free to access content that we've created over the last year, which sits on a platform called LBTV, which essentially is masterclasses, storytelling sessions, workshops, all of that kind of jazz that people can access from their home at any point, and it's new daily content every day of lockdown. And then the other side of the agenda is the paid content. And so on that front, we've now, I think, delivered 7 online productions or pieces of created content over the last year. And they've ranged really from the first one right at the beginning of lockdown, which was a sort of an animated radio play, right up to the most recent, which is The Picture of Dorian Gray, which streams in March. That's basically film. That's basically a film. So we've sort of developed our ambition over the course of lockdown. Along the way, though, we've also done other things. So we've done an animated community production of A Christmas Carol, which took place in December, around the time that every single theatre in the country was doing A Christmas Carol. And we've also done a brand new triple bill of dance, working with Northern Ballet, Gary Clark Company, and Studio Wayne McGregor. So we've tried, I think, to give a digital life to the programme we would have hoped to provide if we'd have been able to open our stages live.
And we've seen, just in general, we've seen lots of kind of positive feedback and reviews of the work that you've been doing. And I just wondered if you'd be able to just talk about the kind of the results that you've been seeing from kind of sales and revenue point of view.
Yeah. So I think it's been an increasing. There's just been a sort of a marked growth over the period of the year. So we started out. I think that the main thing that I would say is that we've been incredibly fortunate in that every single project we've done has generated a surplus of some kind, as well as being received very generously by people, audiences and critics alike, which has been great. But that has grown over the course of the lockdown. So I think something like Toast, which was probably our biggest thing of the first part of last year, we generated around just over £30,000 net, and it cost us about 10 grand to do, I think, and that was audio but with animation. And then What a Carve Up was just had an extraordinary response, and it took just over £100,000, but only cost us 20 to create. So there's been just this overall growth over the year, and fingers crossed for Picture of Dorian Gray.
And what kind of numbers in terms of sales are you getting with those?
Yeah, so I mean, we sell tickets per household. So for What a Carve Up, we sold I think it was around 12,000 household tickets across the world. I guess it's difficult to extrapolate from that how many people are seeing it, because there are obviously links that get sent to people. There's no massively enhanced security around the links we send out, so it's difficult to know quite how many people saw it, but we know over 12,000 households bought tickets.
And it's great that it's also been kind of reaching other countries as well, not just kind of UK based.
100%. Yeah, I mean, we've had audiences in 42 countries now. Not that I've checked every single one. Just to see our work is phenomenal. The vast majority of the work has been seen in the UK, but the world spread has been absolutely crazy, and particularly America and the Far East have been great audiences for us.
Hi everyone. So there's a quick change of shirt from me. And just a word of warning before I go through my slides. My internet is a little bit patchy today, so if I do drop out, then Robin is on standby to jump in and take over. So I'm going to talk to you about some of the findings around paying for digital and the implications for pricing in this final section. Oh, get my notes ready. Seamless, hey. So this question is based on all respondents who were interested in watching digital content. So this chart here, although it excludes workshops and talks and bonus content, what we're looking at is in this kind of dark blue and light blue area that you can see, that's about 64% of respondents, and they were indicating that they would expect to pay something for that digital experience. And if you look at kind of on the far left, you can see in the darker shades of blue, about 6% would pay about the same as live, and 13% just 25% less than live. And if you look at how this then breaks down by different types of digital event, including things like workshops, you can see that there is actually quite a bit of variation. So people interested in workshops and interactive events, they're prepared to pay the most for that experience. But also online specific events, they score quite highly. They're up there in number 3 as well. And at the other end of the scale, there are things like archive recordings, which only about 5% of people would pay the same as live for, and virtual guided tours at about 10%, and bonus content. And for those, you can see there's an increasing proportion of people expecting those to be free or would prefer to give a donation. But actually, type of digital experience isn't the only differentiator which might influence someone's willingness to pay. This chart is actually from some of the work Baker Richards has been doing to help organizations look at maximizing income from their digital offer kind of in general. But what you can see here is how much more appealing different forms of access are in terms of what people are prepared to pay for them. So on the left, you've got 12 months access, and that's clearly the most attractive option here. So it's 20% more appealing than 30-day access in the middle, which in turn is 20% more appealing than single view, or 12 months access is 40% more attractive than single view. So I guess what's important here is to remember that there are a number of ways of justifying different prices based on the value of what your digital offer is. And I'll come back to this in a minute. So when asked how much people had paid for their digital experience in the survey, what we found was the vast majority of respondents, about 76%, said that they watched or took part for free. And actually only 7% had bought a ticket. And this has implications for what they might then expect to pay in future. So if you take those people who had either bought a ticket, made a pay what you can contribution, watched took part for free, and look at what they would expect to pay in future, those that had already bought a ticket, they're much more likely to pay something again in future. So that's shown at the top of the chart. There's 14% saying same as live, 77% less than live, but something. Whereas those who watched or took part for free, down at the bottom, you can see that only 4% of those people are saying same as live, 52% less than live. But what's more striking is that there's a kind of 16% in there saying that they would have expected to be free again. So certainly less likely to pay in future. Again, so I want to talk about some of the initial findings that we've had from the digital experience survey that we're also running. So this is aimed at organizations presenting work online, and it's basically a post-show survey to capture audience sentiment. So if your organization is actually doing digital work, then please do think about signing up. And obviously, the more responses we can get, the more we can learn and the better we can make those experiences. So the first question that we asked was, how much did you pay to take part? So for those respondents who did purchase a ticket, that's the majority of them, about 52% paid between £10 and £20, which for me suggests that there's some sort of anchor price going on around that £10 to £20 mark. And I guess that makes sense given what you'd probably expect to pay for things like NT Live in the cinema. when you could see it in the cinema. But over on the left-hand side, you can also see that 21% paid more than £20. So that's the dark purple and the dark blue. And of those, 11% paid more than £30. So there's definitely differentiation that people have been paying for the experiences. And interestingly, on top of that ticket price, we also asked if people had made a donation. And what we found was that nearly half of respondents had also made a donation in addition to buying a ticket. And that's actually that percentage of people who are donating is much higher than if you were to look at, say, transaction donations for live events pre-pandemic, which were around kind of 13-15% for online purchases. So it does seem to me like there's an opportunity here, especially given that one of the reasons people are prepared to pay for digital content, as Chris pointed out earlier, is to support the organization. So I guess one of the key takeaways from that is make sure that you're asking for a donation. But also don't be afraid to ask for more. So here's a kind of a brief example from an experiment that was conducted at the Exploratorium in San Francisco. This was a kind of pre-pandemic experiment, but the point still stands. What they were doing was that they wanted to test how much people were prepared to donate by changing the amount they asked for. So when no amount was suggested, that average donation amount was $64. Yes, it's US, so it's high anyway. But when they switched that kind of ask to, would you donate $5? Suddenly the average donation amount was $20, so much closer to that $5 anchor price, and less than what you would have got if you'd asked just for a donation. But at the other end, if you were to ask for a more extravagant $400, then the average donation was $143. So not quite the $400, but certainly more than the other two. So you really can influence how much people are likely to give simply by asking for higher amounts. And this is effectively what Kitchener and Waterloo Symphony in Canada have been doing. So this is a currently kind of ongoing series of concerts that they're offering now. So they worked with friends over at JCA Arts Marketing in the States to kind of come up with a pricing model for their on-demand concerts. And what they did, they basically offered a range of prices and explained that it's up to the customer to choose the price for them based on their situation. And they explain that they're very upfront about it. As you can see there, you can read what they're saying. So it depends on how many people are watching, what you might usually spend. And the other thing to notice there is that they start with $100, which that's clearly the high anchor before they move down. And we got some results from this as well. So they actually saw some really impressive kind of numbers on this. So by offering those multiple price points, they found that 44% of their revenue that came from the kind of the top two prices, so from the $100 and the $65 there, so the dark blue and the dark purple, and then 72% of the revenue, kind of continuing around the pie chart, that came from the top three prices. So if you do the maths and go, oh well, if you'd only had a single price point of $15, that would have left about $15,000 in revenue on the table. And by offering that highest price point of $100, they're able to kind of also offer a more accessibly priced $15 ticket, and 25% of the audience purchased that as well. And here's another example that I really like from Cowl Performances, another San Francisco-based organization, and they give each price point a name. So you've got Rockstar over at the kind of the right-hand side, and that's the price for the equivalent of paying for a live version of the event, which, going back to the chart we saw earlier, there's definitely a small proportion of people who will be willing to pay that. And also I like the $0 option, which is only available for subscribers and donors who donate more than $225. So there's a kind of a benefit to being a subscriber or a donor. And then talking of subscription, this is the chart that Chris was showing earlier, which asked people if they'd be likely to buy tickets or subscriptions. So back in that Culture Restart survey, what we found was that obviously people are more likely to just buy tickets for an online event. There is still that small proportion who would consider a monthly subscription. And if you look at the dark blue, that 15%, they could be really quite valuable. They are often, as we've seen with kind of live events, subscribers are often the most valuable customers over the course of their lifetime. And so one of our other clients, Melbourne Symphony Orchestra, what they did, they decided that rather than having they wanted to basically lead by creating a digital platform and lead with a kind of monthly subscription model. So they launched MSO Live kind of back in December. And what they achieved in kind of the first month was a kind of 1,000 signed up members in that period, with the kind of slight majority of people. So you can see there that there's kind of two price points. There's $15 a month, which is just a monthly fee that you pay kind of on an ongoing monthly basis, or there's a $12 a month fee if you pay for 12 months in advance. So essentially you're saving some money. What they found was that there was a slight majority of the customers who went for the $12 a month. So they're kind of committing to 12 months of membership. And by the way, I did speak to their director of marketing the other day, and he told me that if anyone wants to is interested, he can rustle up some discounted memberships for you. So do drop me a line. So just to kind of draw out a few kind of key takeaways from that. I guess one of the things that we're finding is that it's beware of free, basically. I guess it kind of in establishing customer expectations, or at least if you are going to offer something for free, then be clear about why you're doing it. But as we saw, most people who are interested in digital, they are also willing to pay for it. And especially if that digital offers something unique, like an interactive event, as we saw with the kind of the dream example that Chris was showing earlier, or an online specific event. So at least be giving them the option to give you money. We also saw that there's a range of what people are willing to pay. So including some people who would pay as much for digital as they would for live. So that's why the principles of price differentiation that we use for live events can also be applied to the digital content. And then finally, don't forget price anchors. So even when asking for donations, be clear about why you're asking, and also be bold with your ask. Ask for £400 if you think that that's a kind of useful anchor point, and why you're asking for it. Because of course, yes, sure, £2 here and there is fine, but if you're going to ask for a donation, then why not ask for more? There will be people out there who would be prepared to give or pay more. You just have to ask them. So I think I'm going to hand it back over to Chris, aren't I, to give a few more takeaways?
So my takeaways from this is that, firstly, there has been a very slight increase in the number of people interested, very interested or interested in engaging in culture online. That doesn't seem to have gone away. Tie that together with the fact that this does seem to be quite a formative moment for how people engage with content, with cultural content online. It seems to be easier than people expect. It seems to be better quality than people expect. And at the moment, there isn't a great other option out there. So it's a great time to be trying to get people used to another way of delivering these things. If you're thinking that this might be something for the longer term. And there is added to that, there is a window of opportunity at the moment. People are enjoying this. People are motivated to support cultural organisations through the work that they are able to put together. What I wouldn't lose sight of is the fact that there are a lot of organisations out there that there are benefits to collaborating with others rather than going it on your own.
Hello again. My key takeaways, if we jump back into the present in terms of the last 24 hours, thinking again about reopening for in-person experiences, I think the message here is that we need to build confidence for audiences who are currently very, very wary of coming back. And remembering that it's the point of booking is when people first need to feel that reassurance about safety and risk, particularly around, not just the COVID social distancing measures, but also the risk in terms of refunds and exchanges in case they're ill. And that's something that's been consistent throughout this. Although social distancing measures may not be required legally from June, if customer sentiment doesn't shift, and we'll be keeping an eye on that over the next few weeks and months, you may decide that it's necessary for audience confidence in the short term in order to reassure them and ease them back into in-person experiences and build that confidence up. So that's us. We're going to move on to some Q&A in a minute. Just a little bit of an advert for what's coming next. We're going to continue to look at other ways of interpreting the data that we've gathered so far. So the Audience Agency have been having a look at the Culture Restart data and looking at it through audience spectrum groups. So we hope to be able to share that in the next few weeks. Similarly, Morwenna Collett in Australia has been looking at how the data that we have affects, in particular, disabled and vulnerable audiences, and what can be drawn, what findings we can draw from that. So if you're not already signed up for the tools, any of the tools, please do join in. We're going to review the Culture Restart Tracker questions in the light of what was announced yesterday. So we're going to have a think about whether we need to change any of those questions or add some questions in. So those changes will be implemented from the 1st of March. So if you want to be part of that, please do get in touch. We'll be planning our next set of our next webinar and looking at the data again in early April to discuss the findings to the end of March. And I would expect to see some big shifts by that point. All the data that you've seen today and all the data that for the research we've done so far since April last year is all available to download. And we will also email those of you who've attended today with today's slides after the event, probably be tomorrow. So please use the data. Please use the data to make sure that audiences are included in your thinking and planning. I think there'll be a lot of people quite surprised by yesterday's announcement and now running around possibly like headless chickens. So please don't forget the audience when you're doing that planning. So I'm now going to pass over to the lovely Robin from Baker Richards, our own version of Chris Whitty, who's going to handle the Q&A. So there we are.
What a welcome. Thank you very much, Katie and Chris and David. Thank you very much for your presentations, and to Sophie from the BSO and to Henry from the Lawrence Batley Theatre for their contributions as well. At the risk of turning this into an Oscar speech, thank you very much to you for your questions that you've been sending in. Great questions in the chat, and I will try and pick a few out. Let's start with this one, whether there's much data between the four nations, because of course the announcements that were made yesterday on the whole predominantly apply to England only. They don't apply to Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. So where can people get their hands on data relating to the four nations?
Well, the best place is the dashboard, the interactive dashboard, because you can filter the results by nation. So if Flo could tweet out a link to, or put in the chat a link to that dashboard, that's the best place to go.
Thank you very much, Katie. And then I've got a couple of questions here. Well, Sam Evans says, it looks like many are waiting for normal, but also that lots are unhappy with normal if it means no social distancing. And Peter has asked, I beg your pardon, Peter, I'll come back to your question. The other Peter has said he'd be interested to know what folks think about the announcements yesterday and how that impacts on the results of your surveys. Now, I have some thoughts on the implications for socially distant seating, but does anybody have anything more that they want to say on the announcements yesterday and how that could impact the future before I dive into a little bonus few slides?
Oh, go on, Robin, dive in.
Okay, so we know yesterday that the UK government announced that performance could initially return to capacity limits of 50% or 1,000 people, and that those limits will be in place until the 21st of June at the earliest, when, as Katie said before, the legal limits may be removed, but that is not necessarily the same as removing the actual limits, because we know that social distancing of 1 metre plus will be a requirement, certainly for some time, and the plus being enhanced cleaning, face coverings, ventilation, etc., But there may be a desire to retain that beyond the legal requirement. We're seeing that in our data. I'm conscious as I go into this that for some venues, just taking out alternate rows may not achieve 1 meter social distancing due to the width of your rows or the curvature of the space. So you may need to have this kind of pattern here where there are offsets. So if that's the case, some of what I'm about to say will still apply, but some won't. If you are in a situation where just using alternate rows creates a 1 meter gap on the vertical, and you have a good amount of foyer space, and I'll come back to that in a moment, then potentially all of what I'm about to say applies. There's been a real tendency towards predefined bubbles in select your own seats, which of course are relatively quick and easy to set up. It means they're largely self-service, which has been very useful while we've had staff on furlough. They set the bookers' expectations around the distance between them and other groups. And of course, it helps to lean into our standard operating model. So the customers are in predetermined seats. There's a batch print or more likely an e-ticket issue. But we have found that they disadvantage people who are booking alone. They prematurely reduce the price band choices that are available to people. So not just what price band has seats available, but what price band has seats available in the bubble size that I'm looking for. And they set bookers' expectations about the distance between them and other parties at a time now when we know that this could change in the future. They also, and I realise that the graph that I put on screen at the moment looks odd to people, and I'm sure that there would be a debate about the visitor experience here, but it's a demonstration of how, certainly theoretically, when you retain the option to shape how groups are seated yourselves, you can safely activate some seats, for example, in the alternate rows that would conventionally be off sale. So what is an alternative to predetermined bubble select your own seats? Well, this is how performances are on sale for the Rosalind Packer Theatre in Sydney, which is much closer to the sort of capacities that we're aiming for in the UK in the next few months. It's zoned general admission. You can see the explanation there. If I make that a little bigger, that due to current government regulations, we're unable to offer the option to select your own seats. Instead, purchase tickets in a particular zone, and if you have particular requirements, get in touch. So patrons book in a zone, and then their tickets are allocated and sent out as e-tickets later. The venue retains the flexibility to seat patrons to maximise capacity. But to my mind, if your foyer space permits, then you can go further and consider not just zoned general admission, but zoned and timed general admission, as in this example from Sage Gateshead, where their main auditorium was divided into a number of zones. Each zone is given a time slot to arrive in, whether you are enjoying pre-show dining on the concourse or just coming for the performance only. Now, how does that actually work in practice? Well, audiences queue in a socially distanced manner. They're moved between sort of holding locations so that there is a sense of progress. You're queuing here, then you're moving here, then you're moving here. And that could potentially, of course, include the testing, which looks like it's going to be important. When entering the auditorium, the queue are directed to a row by a staff member and told to keep 2 seats between groups. So there's no pre-allocation of seating by the box office, or very limited pre-allocation. The process, and this is really critical, is overseen by confident, warm, welcoming audience experience staff. Sage were great at this. It set the tone for the visit, ensuring that audience members could easily have any questions asked. And in the case of the performances that I attended, there was no interval. So egress and exit was managed by row. And because there are multiple exits at Sage, multiple zones could exit at the same time. So what are the benefits to zoned and timed general admission? As I hope I've demonstrated with that very quick chart, you may be able to legally and safely sell tickets much closer to the 50% capacity. The box office only need to specifically seat customers with access or specific requirements. Parties of all sizes, including people booking alone, have access to the broadest possible choice of price zones for longer and are not restricted in their seat choice by the predetermined bubble locations. Venues retain the maximum possible flexibility to switch up to larger capacity in the future, whether that is the maximum legally permitted or based on the feedback, as Katie has mentioned. And of course, the venues retain the flexibility to fill the house in the most effective way on the day. And assuming there are no intervals, rows are occupied and emptied in an orderly way without the need to remove seats or have ticket holders pass each other in rows to take their seats. Now, I rushed through that because in the light of yesterday's announcements, we have put those slides together quite quickly today, but I hope that is helpful to some. So let's dive back into the questions here, and we've still got questions and comments coming in. Thank you very much for that. Let's take this one here. Should a ticket for a live show automatically give access to the digital content later? Chris, would you like to kick us off on that?
Sure. I mean, my knee-jerk thing would be not necessarily automatically. If and summed up with the last two words of that question, it's more value. If you're giving people more value, then probably not. If they're already coming to the live show, I think if you are capturing the live show digitally, then like maybe you could discount it. Maybe that's one way to go for it. Maybe you can incentivize people who are coming to a live show to share a link to the digital thing with their friends, and that there's a referral link opportunity there. And maybe that's something that you could incentivize, because then friends and family can talk about something when one person's gone to see it, but everyone else can see it as well. Theatre is always spoken of as being a great national conversation that a country has with itself, but if not many people are going to see a particular show, that conversation is only ever going to be between a certain number of people. So I think that's the kind of thing that the digital capture could possibly open up there.
Great, thank you very much, Chris. Janice has an older or more vulnerable audience, but pre-COVID had already identified that their venue needs to attract a younger audience. How do you reconcile the two different needs? Who would like to kick us off on that?
Well, therein lies the golden question, doesn't it? And I think that was already there before with a lot of organisations, but this situation has just made it even more obvious. In terms of practically, I know some venues that are actually talking about having different zones, some of which will be socially distanced and some of which won't. So try and get your head around that one, Robin, with the seating plans. So that, maybe that's a way of doing it. So the people who are more cautious and want more space, I'm assuming that would be the older vulnerable audience from the data that we've seen. Certainly it looks as though the younger audiences will have less worries about returning, even though they'll be the last to be vaccinated. So perhaps that's one way of doing it. And I just think it would be wonderful to see venues where people of all generations can get together again now. And I actually think there'll be a big appetite to want to do things in an intergenerational way because we've all been separated for so long.
That has massive implications then, doesn't it? Sorry, Robin, just to jump in, just in terms of like, if you're trying to get audiences that are kind of extremes of the demographic spectrum all together, there's certain kind of productions which might be able to do that, whereas others maybe are more of a challenge.
Yeah. And coming back to Katie's point about the social distancing, which is my sort of hot topic of the moment, I found myself speculating on a podcast called See Eye to Eye a couple of weeks ago, that actually there may be a long-term future for social distancing as an access performance or even as a premium. I think there is a proportion of our audience who would be encouraged to book by the ongoing presence of social distancing and will be willing to pay more. I fully accept that is not a viable option for a great many types of production and organisations. These examples all seem to be from quite high ticket shows and organisations. How does this look for more grassroots and independent shows? I'll kick off on that one if I may, and just say that obviously this is about scale and economies of scale. And top of mind, I would point you, Adam, to another Adam. Go and look up Adam Lenson on Twitter with the fantastic array of new musicals that he has been producing from a real kind of, I hope Adam will forgive me for describing this, a kind of bedroom setup reaching 20,000 plus audiences. So I'd encourage you to go and take a look at Adam's feed, but many of the concepts, of course, we're talking about often the audiences for digital culture are the people who were highly engaged before. We found that from the Culture Restart data. And so whether your venue and your capacity is big or small, we know those audiences. We have an insight into those audiences already. And of course, we're finding out more about them as time goes on. Does anybody else want to say anything more about the varying scales? Go ahead, Chris.
I'll say something. Partly because quite a few of the examples that I were the ones that I gave, and I'm always a bit wary of showing the big people. It's just that it's easier to see what they're doing. But I think one of the interesting things over the past year is that some of the quite successful things that have been done have been by smaller organisations. So looking at the work of, well, the Lawrence Batley Theatre and the Barn Theatre for a start aren't huge, and their access to big names doesn't come through huge access to resource. It's access to ambition and risk. That's what they have. And I think that chimes in with, there was a really good article by Ash Mann, who's the MD at an agency called Substract. It was in Arts Professional a couple of weeks back, called Going Digital Isn't About Technology. And he made the same point. The organizations that are doing well are the ones that are that have the people who have set their sights a little bit higher, and it's not all the large organisations who have done well with this. I think the characteristics of digitally successful organisations doesn't often come down to money or resource.
Thank you very much, Chris. Huge thanks to everybody for your questions. I'm going to throw in one last question, but just to say, if we haven't got your question, by all means, please do reach out to Indigo, Baker Richards, or one further on a social media platform of your choice. But I'm going to hand over to Katie to wrap up, and I'm going to hand over with a question which Andy Staples has asked, which is the Operation Moonshot question. Andy's interested to know if audiences would accept anything the survey that give indications on this. Katie, what does the survey say?
It says they don't want it. They absolutely don't want it at the moment. I can't remember the percentage off the top of my head, but overwhelmingly they are saying, no, we don't want this. So even if there were lateral flow tests, either that people do, I mean, I can see a situation where maybe box offices are sending out lateral flow tests to people at home to take in advance before they come, so they don't have to set off, and maybe charging them for the privilege, rather than having to queue in the rain and wait outside for half an hour. But it's clear that audiences do not want this, or they certainly wouldn't want not to have to wear masks and socially distance as a result. They obviously don't either trust them, or perhaps they just haven't had enough experience of them yet. I have to say, I had one on Saturday. It was really easy to do, and it felt great getting it done. It was really easy. So maybe, again, once they've experienced it, that will change. But at the moment, the customer sentiment is definitely, we don't want that. So to wrap up, just again, big thanks to all my colleagues. Thank you to you for joining us. And 3 things really: keep in touch with us, let us know what you need, and keep the faith. See you all soon.